God bless all of you today. We're grateful to be here for another clergy conversation. And today, I'm grateful to have with us today one of God's great preachers, great minds, great pastors, and one who has embraced me since I've been here in the great city of Winchester in the great state of Kentucky. He is the proud pastor of the First Baptist Church in Winchester, Kentucky, where he's doing a phenomenal job. So I'm happy to present and welcome today Pastor Marvin King, the proud pastor of the First Baptist Church of Winchester, Kentucky.
Man, I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So, as I always say, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, man, I've had a very interesting background. I did not start out in ministry, in the ecclesiastical sense, man. Born and raised in church, of course, but I'm originally from Houston, Texas. Mama drugged me to church, so man, from the time I was even cognitively aware, man, I'm churched. I'm really churched. But my route to ministry was a very long route, man. I started out, man, as an athlete. And so, man, I played college ball, played a little semi-pro here and there, and then started working in corporate America. And then in corporate America, spent several years working at IBM Global Services here in Kentucky, which is how I got to Kentucky, man. When I graduated school, professional basketball didn't pan out the way I wanted it to. I had to start working. And so, man, IBM in Lexington offered me a job. And so I relocated, came up here and started working. Well, it was in that I found a church home because, I'm churched, and everywhere you go, mama like, man, where you going to church at? And so, but it was during that time, man, I joined First Baptist Church in Bracktown, Lexington, Kentucky, under the direction and guidance at the time of Dr. C.B. Akins, who is my mentor and spiritual father. So, man, during that time I was working, family was young, got married, started having kids. And then, man, the Lord called me to ministry, man. The Lord, called me to, preach. And so, man, my whole life changed, man. So I was bivocational and associate minister, learning, growing. And then my job relocated me to North Carolina. So I left Bracktown, joined a church in North Carolina, still working and just preaching whenever pastor would give me an opportunity, trying to teach as much as I could. And man, then the Lord called me from there with an opportunity to come back to Lexington in full-time ministry, and I took it.
Yes, sir.
At Consolidated Baptist Church under Dr. Richard Gaines in Lexington. So, man, that's really my route, man. And then God called me from there to pastor here at First Baptist.
Yes, sir. So when you're growing up in Houston, as you say, you were in church in Houston because Houston has a strong history of church and great preaching. One of probably the best preaching cities throughout the United States, even now, but especially I know where you. So just talk to us, like, how was the church climate in Houston, and who were some of those major voices that you heard that you just like were enamored with?
Oh man, Doc, man, I grew up in the heyday of preaching in Houston, man, the who's who. So, man, I grew up listening to A. Lewis Patterson as a kid.
Lord have mercy.
So, man, my pastor at the time, Pastor Gene A. Moore of the St. Agnes Missionary Baptist Church at the time, would preach for A. Lewis Patterson he would close his revival out every Friday night. I'll never forget it, man. A. Lewis Patterson, man, at the Mount Corinth Missionary Baptist Church, man, in Houston, would have this Jubilee revival. And man, my pastor would preach every Friday night. Friday night is high night. Man, Friday night revival, man, that's climax, Doc. And so, man, I remember hearing, man, A. Lewis Patterson, guys like Asa Sampson.
Woo!
You know what I'm saying? Those guys, man, were commonplace for me. They came through our church, man, all the time. So those, different pastors, man, Samuel Ratliff, man, at Brentwood Missionary Baptist Church. Man, Brentwood Baptist Church, man, is only 5 minutes from my house.
Wow.
So, man, I got friends, man, that were members of those churches, man. So I grew up listening to all them, you know. And then, as I began to get a little older in high school, then you got the new group of pastors coming to, like Ralph West,
Yes, sir.
right? So Ralph, man, or Doctor, no, let me not be disrespectful, Dr. West, man, Doc, as I'm growing up as a teenager, I am watching the embryonic stages of his ministry at Brook Hollow Baptist Church.
Wow.
I'm watching that. I'm watching him worship at a hotel for several
Mm.
years, man, and being able to he. So, man, I was inundated with that level of preaching as a
Yes, sir.
youngster. Yeah.
Well, one thing, because I remember Dr. West as a kid, because he would come to Oklahoma City, but he would also come to Dallas. Because my father, in the ministry, the one I started preaching under, Reverend Dr. Curtis W. Wallace, him and Ralph Dr. West,
Yeah,
best friends.
yeah, man.
But I feel cheated from this standpoint because Houston has so many great preachers, and one preacher in particular that I've heard so much about that I never got to hear. That I wish I did. It's one song on YouTube I heard, but I don't even think that does him justice. Like Ralph West used to say, was Ralph West's pastor, Dr. O.C. Johnson.
O.C. Johnson, Doc. I knew you were going there. I knew you were going there. Yeah, I knew you was going there, Doc.
I wish, from the stories I've heard and stuff, I wish I could have had an opportunity to hear a prime O.C. Johnson.
So, man, it's funny you mentioned, you know, Reverend Johnson. So, man, I had the privilege of not, even though he was aging, to be able to see the imprint of his ministry in the city of
Yes, sir.
Houston. Those pillars, man, are pillars that I grew up seeing as a youngster,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Not very, not formally, educated, right? But man, God had given him such a command of scripture, and
Yes, sir.
just being able to preach that thing to connect with you, man. It just, man, I consider myself to be really blessed, that kind of environment shaped me, and I
Yes, sir.
didn't even know how it was shaping me at the
Yes,
time.
sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And so when you also are matriculating, as you talked about, with uh basketball, with those things, unfortunately, basketball career didn't pan out the way you may have wanted to. And then you talked about working, but in the meantime, it seems like the Lord was getting you ready for ministry by getting you this opportunity, having experience at Bracktown, but then you have to go to North Carolina, then you have
Yep.
to come back. So how were those experiences for you, like growing, whether how you were growing in ministry, when you first got called to Bracktown as an associate, when you first acknowledged the call to preach at Bracktown, just how was that, that experience, and then how it helped you as you continue to matriculate?
Man, I will be honest with you, man, because I was not a boy preacher, because I came to start preaching, what we would consider a little later in my adult life, right? um the Lord had me on the fast track, and the Lord had me under the right pastor to fast track me spiritually. So, like, Dr. Akins, man, is a stickler for discipline, the discipline of study, the discipline and call to the ministry. And so, man, man, most guys who announce they call to preach, you'll sit for maybe 15, 20 years before you even think about ordination, right? And some pastors don't ordain you until you are called to a church,
There you go.
right? But here's how the Lord worked in my life and in my ministry. Dr. Akins was led by the Holy Spirit to ordain me, and I wasn't even a candidate for no church.
Wow.
And this is what I want to tell a lot of the young preachers, man,
Tell
who
us.
want to shine before they want to serve.
Mm,
You know what I'm
mm.
saying? Like, they want to be, elevated so quick, man, because we in a social media instant gratification kind of society. We think ministry is instant gratification, right? And so, man, my pastor saw how I served, and it is in how I serve, and he could trust me. This one thing, man, a lot of young preachers don't understand. In the seat of pastoring, man, he got to trust you. And just because you can preach don't mean he can trust you.
Lord have mercy.
You know what I'm saying? He got to know that when he ain't around, you ain't trying to take advantage of sheep or manipulate sheep. You know what I'm saying? He
There
got
you
to
go.
know that.
Yes, sir.
And so what I always try to do with Pastor Akins is let him know, Doc, I don't want to be you. I don't want to sit in your seat. I don't covet that. I just want to serve you.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it was in that the Lord granted favor. And so he ordained me, man, after about a year and a half of me preaching.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, by the time, but when I got the call to relocate to North Carolina, man, I cried like a baby. I'm like, man, I'm sitting up on the Dr. Akins, man. I'm getting poured into. I would go to funerals with him. I would drive him. I would do what. And so, but what I did not realize, the Lord was using him to prepare me how to serve under other pastors.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Well, I think you hit it on the nose, because we do, and especially in this time, because everything is publicized, everything is, quick pick, we see picks. And one thing that's hard for young preachers and young pastors sometimes when it comes to the waiting is because when you see your peers and they've already ascended in a sense, and they may have a big ministry, or they may get called to a nice sized church, and sometimes it can be a little discouraging. I know that's how I was. It can be discouraging, but I think one of the things that's a blessing is if you treat your developmental years right, when you get ready, when God gets you ready for the assignment, then you know what to do. But sometimes I think that we want to get, as you say, but we don't. It's the developmental years that really show whether or not you are ready for what you think that you want.
That's exactly right. And I'm so glad that you say that, man. Like, under the 3 pastors in which I served, there were 3 distinct lessons that the Lord was using to prepare me for First Baptist Winchester. But one of the most profound lessons that I learned under Dr. Gaines at Consolidated in this preparation phase is that God does not take you where your character can't handle.
Yes, sir.
And to appreciate the development as the development of my pastoral character, and so that's what I try to share with guys who say, well, man, such and such got this church and it's growing and it's popping off. I'm like, man, hold on. Can you bloom where you planted?
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of how I've always approached ministry, man. Like I want to give the people that I'm with everything I got, and then put the rest in God's hands.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I like that. You already blessing and helping people. Just want to let you know. You blessing.
I hope so, man.
You blessing and helping people. Just want to let you know.
I'm a simple preacher. I'm not very eloquent or profound, man, but I'm just real simple, Doc.
Listen, we not gonna lie on live, okay? We just so then once you leave Bracktown the first time, and then you go to North Carolina, who were you able to serve under in North Carolina? What tools did you gain in North Carolina?
Yeah, so in North Carolina, man, I became a member of the Abundant Hope Christian Church under the pastorate of Mark Anthony Middleton.
Okay.
And Pastor Middleton, man, was a younger pastor. He was older than me, but a younger pastor, man, but was very much culturally relevant. So under Dr. Akins, I learned to appreciate the protocols and discipline of pastoral ministry, the devotional life, the commitment to prayer, to study, education was paramount. But under Pastor Middleton, I learned how to wed the gospel and culture.
Yes, sir.
So I consider Pastor Middleton to become almost like a hip hop pastor in the sense that he was very much culturally engaged. We would call him a woke pastor. So he was very much aware of social justice issues. how the gospel interrogated culture. He was very much aware of that and helped me learn how to integrate gospel and culture. When I relocated to Lexington into full-time ministry with Pastor Gaines, it was with Pastor Gaines that I learned the heart of the shepherd.
Yes, sir.
Pastor Gaines has this awesome shepherd's heart, this pastoral. Like if I look at the word pastor, I see Pastor Richard Gaines right there. You
Legend.
know, who
Legend.
who in his role currently, I consider to be Lexington's pastor.
Mhm.
Whenever something go down, they call him Pastor Gaines because he has such a shepherd's heart. So under Dr. Gaines, I learned the importance of education and discipline and study and pastoral leadership. Under Pastor Middleton, I learned cultural relevancy and how the gospel interrogates culture and how to apply that. And under Pastor Gaines, I learned how to be a pastor.
Yep.
So these three different, dichotomies coming together to shape my identity as a pastor.
I'm gonna use a basketball reference, and you're gonna figure out where I'm going with this, because growing up in the '90s, for me, I loved when every team had a star, but I love the low post game. I love the mid range game. Now, the basketball we have now, I don't always watch it because I believe it sucks, because it's not as good as it used to be, because everybody wants to shoot three. That's why I didn't watch the All-Star game. I watched 2 minutes. I was like, yeah, I'm done with this. Yeah. But the way we see the NBA back then to now, you see this type of difference, this cultural shift, because like I said, we went from a low post game, we went from inside out, we went from every team having a superstar. Now everybody wants to play together, everybody wants to have this. And where I'm going with that is, I think that has happened with especially my generation and even younger, of young preachers, is that some of us have missed the blessing of being a son in the ministry, because of, in a sense, wanting to be like our peers, that we wanted to get to the mountaintop too quickly, but not understanding how to climb first.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. One of the things that to piggyback off your basketball analogy, when I watch, a lot of the younger players don't focus on fundamentals.
Yep.
Right. Everybody wants to have a mixtape. Everybody wants to go out and do all the tricks with the ball. Everybody want to shoot from half court and do that, right? But you don't realize that to get to shoot to that proficiency, there has to be some fundamentals established. And, to your point, I think that there is such value in sonship. But I also believe that the reason why there's a generation of preachers coming up that don't value sonship is because we don't have many fathers either.
Yep.
Right? Not only fathers in the church, we don't have fathers in the community. We don't have fathers in the home. So we have lost our respect for fatherhood, which has translated to ministerial lack of respect for spiritual fatherhood and sonship.
Yes, sir. I like that. I'm taking that in the sermon, just to let you know.
Oh, man, go ahead.
I'm taking that in the sermon. So then when you get back to Lexington, and you get your first full-time ministry opportunity at Consolidated under Dr. Gaines, and let me just say, Dr. Richard Gaines is a gospel legend, preaching pastoral legend, who is by far one of just the greatest people that you can ever encounter. He is a gospel legend.
Yes.
But how was that experience for you?
Oh my gosh. I sat under Dr. Gaines for 3 years, and I am fortunate because I consider myself to have two fathers in ministry. Pastor Akins birthed me, but Pastor Gaines and Pastor Akins are close friends. And so Pastor Akins entrusted me to Dr. Gaines for my continued development. So when I came back to Lexington, Pastor Gaines hired me on staff, and both of them are friends, right? And that didn't cause any contention, and we know how pastors can be when you got sons, and I'm a son, right? But Pastor Gaines became my godfather in ministry.
Yes, sir.
So sitting under Dr. Gaines every day was a learning lab every day of my ministerial career for 3 years.
Yes, sir.
I was exposed to some of the brightest minds theologically because of his network. I got the opportunity to sit in rooms and spaces, and doors were open for me because I was able to humble myself and submit and not try to shine, but to sit and to soak up and not seek to be heard. Right. So it was a learning lab for me. Man, every day, man, he was sharpening me, pouring into me, man, every day for 3 years. Every day for 3 years. And so much so we still have a tremendously close relationship even now.
That's a blessing.
Mhm.
That's a blessing because I believe every pastor needs you need a pastor first off. Every pastor needs a pastor, but you also need those who you can really lean on as well, that can really give you these tools, give you that can
Yep.
as you say, push you theologically, push you in your sermon preparation,
Mhm.
push you in prayer, push you
Mhm.
in being a better leader, a better shepherd. And I
Mhm.
think that's nothing wrong with that. Is that we need that as we continue to serve God's people, is that to be a pastor and to really be an effective pastor, you should desire to be better.
Yes. Man, I approach pastoral leadership and preaching the same way I did as an athlete. Every day I had to shoot to get better. Every day I had to work out. Every day I had to condition. Every day I had to do that. And so the mental and spiritual preparation it takes to be effective is a daily walk, man. And I think that we have to I was in a seminar with Dr. Melvin Von Wade, and he talked about the devotional life of the preacher and how important that is. The devotional life of the preacher, man, is very much similar to the athlete daily working out, right? I heard Dr. Robert Smith, who is one of America's premier preachers, man,
If you
talk.
don't have doctrines that dance,
Yeah,
you
man.
need to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is going to be a timeless classic that lasts much longer than his lifetime. But again, Dr. Smith is one of the ones that I was exposed to because him and Dr. Gaines are very close friends.
Yes, sir.
You know what I'm saying? So when Doctrine That Dances was released, we get the copies of the book before it ever hit the shelf. So man, we in ministers class talking
Wow.
about Doctrine That Dances, or having Dr. Smith come and do private conversations regarding that. You know what I'm saying? So those are kind of things, man. I was actually afforded by the favor and grace of God to experience sitting under Dr. Gaines, man.
Yes, sir. And so then you're with Dr. Gaines,
Mhm.
and then and just a quick sidebar, as Pastor King has talked about basketball. I just want to thank him for allowing us, because his son plays at Iowa State. So I want to thank Iowa State. I want to thank y'all for letting my Oklahoma State Cowboys beat y'all twice this year. It ain't been we didn't have some rough, as he's got this smirk on his face because it's killing him on the inside. But we want to thank y'all Iowa State for letting us Oklahoma State Cowboys beat y'all. But don't worry, next year we'll see next year, because me and him are going to a game together next year. But that's neither here nor there. But we want to thank y'all. I just want to throw that. I just had to throw that in.
Yeah, when y'all go to the dance, you can thank me because y'all just got to the dance based upon those victories. But that's a whole nother
That's a
conversation.
whole nother, we're gonna have that conversation after later on. But as you're in Consolidated District, Consolidated Baptist Church, how did getting to First Baptist Winchester come about?
Man, it's crazy. Man, I told Pastor Gaines when I sat under him and I was working on staff, I said, man, you got to put me out this church. I listen, no, seriously, man. This real talk, man. Real talk. I told Pastor Gaines, I said, man, listen, in order to get rid of me, you're gonna have to put me out the church because I ain't going nowhere. Right. And here's the thing, man. So Pastor Gaines got with that First Baptist Church was looking for somebody to fill the pulpit. The pastor had left. He said, man, why? He said, I got a call. Will you go down and fill the pulpit one Sunday? And I said, man, yeah, okay, cool. Now I wasn't trying again. I was not trying to be a pastor. Let me qualify and clarify that. And so I came back. I filled the pulpit that one Sunday. I came back. and he and I, even though, Monday, we took off on Mondays, he and I still would talk all the time. So he asked me, he said, man, how was it? I said, man, it was all right. It was good, preach, do your thing, get up out of there, come on home. You know what home is. Home was consolidated. And he looked at me and he said, I have a sneaking feeling that you're going to be there. I said, no, man, no, not me. Because I didn't even apply. Man, a couple of days later, man, the chairman of the pastoral search committee called me and said, hey, man, we noticed you didn't apply. Would you be interested? The people liked you. Are you interested? I said, man, sure. Well, first of all, I said, man, I ain't qualified because everything y'all looking for, I don't have. They was looking for at least 5 years pastoral experience. They were looking for somebody who already had a seminary degree. I had not yet, right? And so I was like, oh man, no, I don't qualify. And I said, man, you know how it is, man. You go through pastoral search, man. You don't want that letdown. Yes. I had already been in a pastoral search twice.
Absolutely.
And I said I was done.
Absolutely.
Man, the anxiety of that, the high, the low.
It's real.
You go preach at some church, man, and you give them the best you got, and then they talk about how much they love you, and we're gonna call you back, and then all of a sudden you don't even make the final candidate list.
In some churches they'll never call you back. They just call another pastor. You never know what happened.
Yeah, you don't even know what happened, man. You know what I'm saying? And so you got this, you're going through these emotional, spiritual somersaults, man. Like, am I going? Am I not? And I'm like, man, I'm done. I was done with that process. And I told Pastor Gaines, you're going to put me out. He said, I think you're going to be there. He said, he said, I'm beginning to try to let go of you because I know you ain't going to be here. I said, man, no, I don't even qualify. Lo and behold, long story short, man, I put my name in and I made the top 3. Wow. I came back and preached 2 more times. And the second 2 times I was actually a candidate. The first time I was not. And man, they called me, man.
Wow.
And I was like, man, are y'all sure? I remember the phone call I got. And I asked the chairman of the pastoral search committee, I said, man, are y'all sure y'all called me? Because I know me. What you see is what you get, but yeah, man, and so they called me, man. And I'm telling you, man, they had dudes that that in my opinion could preach circles around me. Guys who had, and both of them were already pastors. I mean, I'm a newbie, you know what I'm saying? I ain't never done this thing before. I've sat close enough to the chair, but I ain't sat in it, right? So that's how I got here, man.
Well, and so I think you hit on something that's amazing is that how God orchestrates pastor in church.
Yeah.
But also how God deals with the preacher, because when you've had letdowns, when you've had when you've as you said felt like you were on that cusp, and then with that, as we preach that Dear John letter comes.
Yeah, man.
When you feel like you're right there. I've known guys who have lost the vote by 1 vote, lost 1, and was crushed, hurt. Like, we're talking about wounded. So when you're there, and as you say now, you get this opportunity, but as you're getting the opportunity, you see the Lord working, because as you talked about, there was this in a sense, this kind of fear in a sense where it's like, because even when you trust God, sometimes in the back of your mind, you're like, what about if it happens again?
Yeah. And I think what many churches don't realize is, man, sometimes in the way that the process plays out, it can leave preachers very wounded. It can leave you with blemishes on your self-esteem. Not that we boast or anything in our abilities or anything like that, but there are times when you start questioning, do I have what it takes? What were they looking for that I did not demonstrate that would have qualified me to be considered to lead them spiritually, right? And so there are a lot of dynamics that play in one's head when that rejection letter comes or that rejection phone call.
And I think what also hurts is as well when you do meet all the qualifications, when you even had a great Sunday preaching there, whether you had to teach Sunday school, whether you had to do Wednesday night Bible study, but you meet the qualifications, you still had a great you had a great experience,
Yeah.
but then you still feel, but then you still get that letter, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, shoot, like what
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah. Yeah. And then you start asking yourself that question, what is it, right? And through the process of seeing so many processes play out, I've realized that not every process is God driven or God led. And some of it don't have nothing to do with the preacher. Has nothing to do with your qualifications, has nothing to do with any of that. Sometimes it's just that people want a certain person,
Absolutely,
you know.
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
which moves me to how I think about pastoral ministry now, man. I have always been one, and I learned this under Pastor Gaines, but it was modeled in front of me with Pastor Akins, the longevity of being with the people. And so, I don't pastor a mega church, man. I don't pastor, 5,000 folk, 1,000 folk. I don't, we ain't nowhere near that. But, you know, I've learned that that does not measure the success of your ministry. And once I realized that, I was able to pastor in a way that freed me to be effective.
Absolutely. You know who helped me with that? The late Dr. Leonard Smith out of
Mhm.
Washington D.C. He
Okay.
said something one day on Facebook, because I used to follow him. I had a couple conversations, but it's Dr. Smith.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
was
yeah,
busy
man.
all the time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he said something that I never will forget. He said, "Just because you can't preach at the Hampton Ministers Conference
Mhm.
doesn't mean where you are can't be the Hampton Ministers Conference."
Mm,
And
mm,
that has helped me because, as you say, even if you never get, let's say, a Potter's House, or even if you never get,
yeah,
on the national circuit, where God places you every week,
yeah,
that make that
yeah.
the place, make that, grow that, and when you do that, then God will do the rest.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, man, because I have always told our folk, man, we may not have a mega church, but we will always have a mega ministry.
Yes, sir.
And I've always been of the belief, especially we as a African American people, I don't know about you, but man, we didn't grow up with a big house and nothing like that. But Mama made sure that that house was clean. She made sure that you know it may not have been a 5 bedroom, 5,000 square foot house, but wherever we are, it's our mansion.
Yep.
And so I've taken that into ministry. No, we won't have 1,000 members or 2,000 members, but this is our mega church.
Absolutely.
This is our mega ministry.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be what we need to be for who we are in our community. So that's
Absolutely.
really,
Absolutely. That's how you have to do it.
yeah,
So when you first got to First Baptist Winchester, and you're in those first, developmental years, even as a pastor, this is your first pastor. So you
yeah,
in the seat now. So
yeah.
how was that learning experience for you? How was that learning curve for you? How are you growing in those experiences?
Well, I committed the cardinal rule. I committed the cardinal sin for a new pastor. Most older pastors will tell you, go in, learn, you know, don't do nothing, don't make no changes, don't do nothing until you learn them people, right? I committed the cardinal sin. I took a page of wisdom from my mama. A new broom sweep clean. You don't wait for the broom to get worn out before you start trying to sweep. And so there were things that I began to do instantly. Now, I did come in and learn the people. I spent a lot of time with people. Don't get me wrong. I did all of that. But I also knew, after prayer and spending time with the Lord, exactly what the Lord showed me for this house. And so what I began to do is to build those critical relationships and begin to start moving the house in a particular order. So we began to start doing some things behind the scenes to start setting foundations for growth, setting foundations for spiritual renewal and awakening and vibrancy. We started doing those things, laying them at the foundational levels, so that then by the time you people could see it visibly, the foundation could sustain it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Well, I like that. I like that because, you know, for those who are watching who are not familiar, you know, when you, because I'm gonna have them talk about it later, but when you get a chance, look up First Baptist Winchester and look up Pastor King as a preacher, because he, first of all, he can preach. Just tell you that now. Man can preach. He can flat out go. Okay, he can go get it. All my boys, y'all know what I mean. This man right here can flat out go get it. Okay, and the First Baptist Winchester is doing a phenomenal job in this city. And so for what Pastor King has said, it's an inspiration just to watch and see all that God is leading him to do. And I think as well, when you look at that, is that one, it's true when you get called to a church, when you get to a church, there are going to be things God shows you that you do have to do.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, it's cultivating those relationships. It's learning the people. It's growing with them.
Yeah. I think one of the things you talked earlier about God preparing you. And one of the things that is part of my background of experiences is that I was actually in leadership at IBM. So I had the privilege of, they sent me off to new manager school. And so I learned a lot of leadership principles and practices. And so that became a part of my ministry as well. So when I come into First Baptist, I'm bringing a tool set with me of tools and practices that in our case, our church had never seen before. And many of those tools and practices were cultivated and sharpened at Consolidated through leadership development and training and all those kinds of things. And so that's really one of my thrusts as it relates to the church. We spend so much time developing people on their jobs, send them off to training to do those jobs, but we don't spend that kind of time in the church. And so I began to try to move our church on a trajectory to develop leaders.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so as you're growing in First Baptist Church, also Pastor King was in First Baptist was fortunate to do a renovation project, which is a beautiful renovation project from what they did. How did you get to that place?
So, and again, breaking cardinal rules, but when you follow God, and this is what I would tell anybody, don't do nothing just to say you doing it. You got to make sure that that the Lord has released you and affirmed it, because that's really what I did. I didn't just come in making changes because I was making changes. I really prayed and I really said, God, give me direction. So everything that I did, what I helped the people understand was I'm led by God to do this. Because our renovation project came in year 2 of me
Wow.
being here. Oh yeah, that's year 2 of taking a church that was like, wait a minute, you're a new pastor. What you mean we're gonna incur some debt? We're gonna restructure some stuff. We're gonna redo our mortgage. What we doing, right? Right. And so that was an opportunity for them to also trust that I'm being led by God, because everything we did, Pastor Brown, when I said that the Lord told me, and I said, y'all trust me, I know you can't see it, it happened. And so those little wins was what God used to develop that trust between pastor and people. So yeah, we went through a renovation project. We took a church that, again, you've been to our church, is very traditional in terms of its structure, its architecture, its interior design, and we gutted it. And really what the impetus was on that is that we had a very dated church. And if you want to grow, you gotta, nobody keep the same furniture in their house for 80 years. You spruce it up a little bit. Well, it's only so many flower arrangements you can put in the sanctuary. It's only so many plaques and so many banners you can put up to help it look nice. And you know what I'm saying? The carpet was wearing out, pews were torn. We some healthy people. So we plop in there, we shouting and cracking pews, and you know what I'm saying? We got to put 2x4s on the pews because folk jumping on pews and shouting, you know. And then we had, and and I've been planting seeds with the trustees for a minute. And here's where the Lord allowed them to see the need of stepping out on faith. Man, we was in church one Sunday, and our stained glass windows, we had some that were broken, and some that over time weather had warped them.
Okay.
So you could see through them. You could, and one Sunday it was raining, and everybody that sat on that side of the church got rained on through that one glass window. And they had to move from base. And this is year 2.
So you had a flood. You had Noah in the ark, basically
Man,
about
the
to come
Lord
through.
gave a divine rain, bro. He gave a divine rain. And so it was the catalyst for our capital campaign. And they were like, okay, Pastor, we got you. And so the way our church was, man, we had so many things that was wrong, man. Our baptism pool, I was scared to baptize because the baptism pool was leaking. And I was scared that if the wood had rotted any more than what it was, the baptism pool with me in it and possibly somebody else was going to fall through the floor.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. I'm telling you, man, that's where we were. And it's just to be totally transparent, right? And you couldn't fix the baptism pool without fixing the window. You couldn't fix the window without fixing the carpet. You couldn't fix the carpet without going to the pews. So we were like, well, shoot, by the time we do all that, man, we might as well go ahead and do the whole thing. And so God led us in that journey, man. And that's what happened.
Well, that's a blessing. The rain story is pretty funny, though.
Yeah, that's a true story. That's a true story.
That's what. So also in this time of you, of course, you all were able to accomplish that monumental feat. How are you developing as a preacher?
Bruh, I would say this. I was learning. My faith was growing in a level that I had never experienced before in my entire life, because the weight and the magnitude of living out loud our faith and the criticality of that and its impact on how that shapes other people's lives was ever in front of me. I was surrounded by people who were looking and relying on me to understand what it looks like to follow Christ in this area of gray, this gray area of life. And so for me, that was a tremendous burden, but it also kept me so humble and so broken that I had to lean on God.
Absolutely. And so, what is your sermon process like?
Oh man, I wish I could say I try to be a series preacher because it is so easy. It's easier when you have a busy schedule to plan and think ahead of time, and you know where you're going. And for the most part, that's what I do. For the most part, I've just started doing that in the past 5 to 6 years more intentionally. So man, I will get about 10 themes for the entire year that I will start working and sermon prepping on. And so I will, when I knowing what I'm doing, next month, like next month, I'm doing something on mental health, our mental health, right? Unless the Lord changed something up. So I'm always studying, always reading ahead, because I know where
Absolutely.
I'm going.
Absolutely.
We are finishing up a sermon series on joy. So we started out the year taking back our joy, the fight for your joy. So man, I knew where I was going, man, the whole time.
Well,
So
go ahead.
yeah, so I start working. So I start looking at next week's sermon on Sunday night.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I probably have now, for the most part, if I have a good week, I can pretty much outline 2 to 3 sermons in a week. That's just a rough outline. I kind of go through it, look at the text, look at its nuances, look at some of the literary structure of the text, trying to find Is there any repetition? Is there any question that the text begins to deal with or address? So, going through all of that, though, the litany of steps that we go through to evaluate the text. And then the last thing I do, man, and I usually do this on Friday, is get solidify my life application points.
So now, are you a outline? Are you a full manuscript? Do you use notes? How do you go when you go to the pulpit? What do you bring with you?
I bring notes, but I don't look at notes. Now, I was taught to be a manuscript preacher. Dr. Akins is a manuscript preacher, and he made us, and I'm so thankful he did this. I couldn't stand him for doing it, though. I'll be honest with you. I couldn't stand him for doing it. He made us write a manuscript for every sermon.
Absolutely.
And I hated it. But looking back over my preaching life, I appreciate him and thank him, because I do a manuscript for every sermon now. I don't use a manuscript. I only use notes, and I internalize my text. I internalize my notes, and I internalize my points, for the simple fact, not because I don't like to preach from notes, not that I don't like to preach, because I take my notes to the pulpit. I take all that to the pulpit, all of it. But I am 6'7", and the average height of the pulpit is so much lower than what I am. My eyes cannot follow a manuscript or notes well enough and maintain eye contact thorough enough to be able to do it effectively. So the Lord has gifted me with the ability to internalize and to preach my manuscript without looking at it.
And yes, Pastor King is that tall. Trust me, he's tall. Okay, but yes, and when he comes to Broadway in April, whatever notes he puts on that pulpit, since he said he don't use them, I'll just gladly just remove those. Look at them myself and say, well, you didn't use this, and just make some little tweaks, just some tweaks. Nothing.
Man.
Nothing
Those
too
of y'all who watching, y'all know that this joker is one of the most prolific young preachers around. So, man, don't let him gas y'all up out there here. Let him do that to y'all.
Thank you. But I'm taking your notes. Okay, I just want to let you know that. But also, when we look at preaching, as we look at preaching from where you grew up to now, to where even, I grew up to now. But when you look at preaching from where you grew up, where you started to now, what are things that encourage you about preaching? And what are things that, in a sense, maybe kind of discourage you about preaching?
I am encouraged. Let me start with what I'm encouraged by. I'm encouraged by what I see as the resurgence amongst young preachers towards expository preaching. I'm encouraged by that, because there was a brief period that I realized and started seeing that many young preachers began to become topical preachers, and the topical preaching kind of strayed away from the integrity of the text.
Right.
And what happened was, I started watching a lot of young preachers create these mass followings, creating nothing more than what I call to be spiritual counseling sessions, and not really preaching the gospel.
Absolutely.
They began to have these spiritual self-help sessions couched under the banner of preaching. I don't believe, man, that you can preach the gospel and not touch a text.
Right.
That everybody's supposed to hang on your word, and you never explain how God is revealing himself through time, through space, through history, through the narrative of scripture, and don't arrive at the conclusion of Jesus Christ and him being the only way to the eternal relationship with God that solves all of man's plight and problems. I just don't believe you can touch a text and not get there if you are being integrous to the text.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so then what in a sense discourages you then?
What discourages me is when I find lazy preachers preachers who are so enamored and just want to be heard, but don't want Christ to be seen.
Wow.
They are more concerned with their appearance in pulpit protocols, etiquettes, than they are about hiding themselves behind the cross of Christ, so that they would decrease, that he would increase. That discourages me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No.
And so I think we're also in a critical time of preaching now, to where we have to be, and we have to make sure that we are preaching what the Bible says, because we are living in times where people are inquisitive,
Mhm.
people are very intelligent, and people are hurting. People are, one thing I don't like is when I see sometimes people, when I read maybe different articles or see different things where it says like, well, the church has lost some of its influence, or the church has lost some of its power. But then when I see, when the preaching of the gospel is taking place, when it's the unadulterated word of God and the impact that it makes, it blows everything else out the water. So the question can be, is it that the church has lost influence, or did the pulpit lose influence?
I think that as the pulpit loses influence, and as the pulpit loses its way, the church loses its way. I think there's a proportional relationship that exists between pastor and people.
Yes, sir.
That, as we create anemic Christians, we create anemic churches, right? And what happens is it creates confusion in the world, because there's something wired in the psyche of humanity that they know what they should be expecting and seeing out of the church. And when they don't see it, then their language is sometimes inaccurate, but what they are observing is absolutely correct. It's just that the language is off.
Wow.
So, it's not necessarily that the church has lost its power, because, there are some folk that call themselves a church that don't really operate like the biblical church. But again, I understand what they're saying. What they're saying is, y'all supposed to be the church, and we know who you supposed to be connected to. And when we don't see that kind of fruit, it creates confusion in us, because we see you are not fulfilling the obligation of what you're supposed to be as the church.
Somebody asked somebody asked me, bro, if you would define anemic Christians.
Oh, anemic Christians. Okay, so we know that anemia is when a person lacks the proper nutrients in their blood, that causes them to be tired and weaker, because the blood does not have its nutrients. Anemic Christians are those who name the name of Christ, but yet have not availed themselves to the integrity of our Christian doctrine. They are not plugged into the vine, according to John 15:5. I am the vine, ye are the branches. If you abide in me and I abide in you, you will bear forth much fruit. When Christians have no fruit, they are anemic, because they are not plugged into the source that provides nutrients.
Lord have
The
mercy.
tree gets, the reason why you see leaves on the tree is not because of the branches, it's because of the roots. The roots take the nutrients out of the soil and transmit it to the branches, that then bear forth the fruit in the leaves. So when Christians want to be associated with the church, but yet don't want to really abide in Christ, they become anemic, because you cannot be separated from Christ and live.
We can literally just open the doors of the church right now. I told my big bro, Pastor Bill Caldwell, said he's he's the preacher. I mean, this dude is something else. I mean, that's a word that we all need to hear.
Yeah.
That's a word we all need to hear, as whether preachers, pastors, churches, and Christians. And something else I think that's important for us is we have to be studious, whether that's seminary education,
Yes.
whether that's reading. Me and my big brother and best friend, Pastor Bill Caldwell, we had this conversation all the time
Mm.
because we're living in a time as well, and I hate to see it, and it really makes me kind of discouraged from the standpoint is if you can't go to seminary because let's just say finances, let's just say you have to take up a full-time job. What discourages is that sometimes we have those who do go, but may throw shade at those who don't go
Yeah, man.
because of that. But on the same time, when you flip the coin, a person that may not go to seminary because some people may feel like I don't need it. I've seen others that don't go, but then don't cut somebody's legs down who did go, who
I,
did put the time in. Because I feel as though at this day and time, everybody needs some level of theological education. Even if you may not be able to finish a degree, you
yeah,
need some level of theological education.
yeah. I'm a firm believer in that. So I'm gonna say this, man. I can't stand pastors, and I'm gonna be very authentic, probably to a fault right now. Pastors who live in insecurity of their own academic prowess, who know that they don't know what they should know, and you know, sit back and be like, "Well, the Holy Spirit gonna tell me everything I need to know." Well, you do realize that God also used men and women to, saying to share the gospel and to teach and to equip. You don't go to a job and then go just start running a machine without being educated. You don't go and teach school without being educated. And here's my argument, man. We are the only institution I know of that'll let a joker get up on what he feels, say what he feel or what he think without having any formal education. Now, I agree with you. Not everybody has the means, the ability to be formally educated, which is why, Pastor Brown, for those of us who have, we have an obligation to create, even in the local church, seminary type education for people. So even though they don't get to go to seminary, we come from a community where if you had a family of more than a few siblings, the oldest one taught the youngest one, the younger one taught the other younger ones, and you taught each other. And that's how we survive. It's the same thing in the church. Those that now we may not teach them how to read Hebrew or Greek, but we ought to teach them some basic things about the overall. No preacher should be weak in systematic theology. No preacher should be weak in New Testament, Old Testament survey. No preacher should, even as they're called to preach, should not avail themselves to the practices of spiritual formation and spiritual discipline.
Yep.
So there are some basic nuances. And because I'm telling you, there are things that education will open your mind up to that gives God more of you to be able to use, to be able to reveal more of him to his people.
Absolutely. I used to always say when I first started, some others didn't have education and they have major ministries in this,
Yeah.
but then you ask them and they'll tell you, I wish I would have went to school.
Yeah.
So what does that say when some of the guys we love that we know that can dump a house and everything, who say, I wish I would have. And now we're seeing some of our gospel legends, gospel preachers, gospel pioneers going back to school to get education. And I think it's important because we live in a time now where you have to be educated because one of my best friends, Pastor Delmas Gillis from Bethlehem Baptist Church in Clovis, New Mexico, he does this master's class for his congregation, which is thorough, deep theologically.
Wow.
And it's inspired me to do something on those same lines because as you talk about spiritual discipline, spiritual formation, systematic theology, and then one of the biggest topics, apologetics.
Apologetics. That's right.
What do you believe? Why do you believe it? Here's how to defend it. And all, and like I said, and I tell Broadway and Bible study, and you know, because I'm sure you tell First Baptist, we got all these different religious cults now. We got all these different religious people that are twisting scripture to try to make a point and confuse minds. That's why, like I was telling you, I love so much Eric Mason and the work he does with the woke church, urban apologetics, because we are living in times where, and as you say, even if a person cannot go to school or cannot finish, if I have something that will help you, why should I be selfish and withhold it from you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and you know, one of the things that I'm so thankful for Dr. Akins for doing with us as associate ministers, he made us study like we were in seminary. He taught us how to study like a seminarian. So when I finally got to seminary, I was like, oh man, I already had this, I already studied. And so it helped me to bridge the learning gap, if you will, because there were so many things that I had already been exposed to in my formative ministry, right? You know, so I love that, man, you know, that to encourage education.
And I just wish, like myself, I wish I would have started earlier.
Me too.
You know, I've been fortunate to get a bachelor's, get a master's, which is great. People have been on me to get a doctorate, which I'm just praying about that right now.
I feel you.
But I think as we look at it, because I know I'm gonna have to let you go in a couple of minutes, but I'm enjoying this conversation. So if I keep it a little longer,
you're good, bro.
It's working. But I think when we look at this education, when we look at theology, when we look at systematic theology, one thing about theology that helped me, that really actually was an eye opener, the difference between Aramaean theology and Calvinist theology, because really when we look at the local church, a lot of times people who may say they're Calvinists really show sometimes Aramaean theology more than Calvinist, and a lot of people who say that all the time don't necessarily represent Calvinists. So you need these tools, these nuggets. You need to understand the creed, Nicene Creed. You need to understand, you know, Constantinople, but also when we look at it from an African American standpoint, we have to understand as well. I just finished this book about the early African Christians. People like Tertullian.
Oh man, and
you know what I'm saying? St. Augustine. Yeah, St. Augustine.
Man, see, what people don't realize is, and this is what, you know, I think education does, man. You cannot have a conversation on Christian doctrine without talking about Augustine. You can't talk about you can't talk about the church. And for those of y'all listening who may not understand Augustine, you know, man, that's a brother.
Black dude.
That's a black dude.
Yep.
And that black dude has shaped the Christian church in the world today.
Yep.
You don't learn that in BTU. You know what I'm saying?
And that's just true.
Yeah. And so all of the practices that we can be traced back to something, even discipleship, the way Augustine discipled.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And the requirements of making sure people were really committed to the faith. Man, that's Augustine.
Augustine.
You know what I'm saying? You mentioned Tertullian. You know what I'm saying? I mean, all these people shaped. And so we have to understand the vital role that they play in our understanding, you know, and then too, understanding, man, between, you know, Calvinism and Arminianism, there are although they seem to be drastically different, they're not. It's only one major thing they kind of disagree on.
Yeah. I mean, when you really dissect both segments, they're really more together than what it lets
Then they are different.
Yeah.
You know, and Arminianism, you know, moving into, you know, Methodism and John Wesley and all that, you know what I'm saying? Understanding how that's shaped and understanding that for denominationally, we're not very different.
Baptists and Methodists aren't that different. Baptists and primitive Baptists aren't that different.
Are not different. That's right.
You know, like seriously, you know, so it's a lot of things when we really look at these different denominations. We're about 95%. now that 5% will try to
Ah,
wedge.
because that 5% are make people that claim Christ not even talk.
Exactly, that 5%. But so yeah, so that's why I think it's important to where, and I would tell anybody, man, if you read, but what I would tell anybody, because I did it one day. I reached out to those professors who taught in seminary because
Mhm.
I want to know, because my desire is to teach in the academia and be one of those biblical scholars. That's one of my goals. So I want to know, what are they reading? What are they?
Mhm.
Because it's some authors that you would never hear about. Listen, I love Max Lucado. Max Lucado is awesome, but I want to hear these critical minds. I would tell anybody that's watching, since we're talking about, it's Black History Month, since we're talking about African Americans, go read Howard Thurman. Go
Yeah,
read
okay.
Jesus and the Disinherited.
Yeah,
Go
man.
look up Benjamin Mays. Go
Yeah,
look up these like Samuel Proctor.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
there's a book called The Faithful Preacher, The Faithful Call, that talks about the most important three black preachers of the early mid 1700s, late 1700s, 1800s. But those things, because we need that
yeah,
as well. And I think, as you talk about church being church and culture,
yeah.
we're living in that time as well, church and culture, where we have to preach the gospel, but we do have to have that prophetic voice.
We do, and I think that for us as Black preachers, man. And before I say this, I want to highlight another Black preacher that came along the same time as Samuel Proctor, same time as James Cone. He's actually from Kentucky,
James Cone. Okay.
which is William Augustus Jones.
William Augustus Jones. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All of them, man.
Yes, sir.
Him, Gardner Taylor, Samuel Proctor, Sandy Ray. All of these guys are
Whew.
tight. Were tight in their heyday, you know. And so we have the privilege to be connected to on the soil of where William Augustus Jones preached and cut his ministry teeth, right?
Whew.
Who writes the book God in the Ghetto.
God in the ghetto. Yes, sir.
You know what I'm saying? So when we look at those dynamics, right? The Black preacher has never lost the responsibility to be prophetic. Out of any preacher culturally, the Black preacher has been the prophetic voice. And I really believe that even in the next dispensation and seasons of our human development, evolution in the church, the Black preacher's voice will become even that much more pronounced, because it is in the Black pulpit that we can't compromise. It is in the Black church that the congregation, regardless of its educational level or spiritual awareness, expects the Black preacher to tell the truth. It is the
Absolutely.
only church that encourages, to the magnitude of what it does, to say, tell it, pastor, preach it. You know what I'm saying? And if you don't tell the truth, if you do not stick to the book, if you don't step on toes, if you don't create that tension that exists, you lose your power in the Black church,
Absolutely.
because they look at you as somebody who compromised.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. That's what I'm talking about. Well, also, so then let me ask you this question. How was for you, we are still dealing with a little bit of COVID, but
Mhm.
how was it for you from the start to now? What lessons did you learn? How did you lead the First Baptist? What were some things that you picked up on?
Man, one, I realized that the Black church in this season of our cultural development in the 2000s, this new millennium, is not as strong as it was in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and even part of the 90s. And that we need to go through a reclamation process in the Black church, because it is through COVID that helped us understand how weak the branches of the Black church and the Black community is. There was a time when the Black church was essential to the Black community, even if you wasn't a part of the church. COVID showed us this storm broke off a lot of the branches. And there are so many Black folk who were raised in church, who were even in church prior to the pandemic, who have no longer returned to the church. So it has led me to see very critically that the Black church needs to go through a resurgence of its mission and its impact and relationship to the Black community. That the Black church is still a relevant and vibrant and vital institution for the sustaining of the Black community. And so that's that is probably the most pronounced lesson I learned. But then I learned that, man, some folks just ain't coming back to the church, and we have to learn how to run lean. And what I mean by lean is we get a chance to see God take the remnant and do great things with a remnant. So that and then the third lesson I learned is that the Black churches who did not think ahead and were not thinking progressive are the ones who struggling, because not every Black church is struggled through COVID. Now, attendance may have dropped, but the vibrancy of the church, the relevancy of the church did not really diminish as much, because people were able to be flexible and pivot, because there was the relationship that we have a contingent of pastors in our in our churches now that are so rigid on yesterday that they were not prepared for COVID.
Yep.
Guys who rejected technology, guys who rejected progression, guys who rejected, thinking about newer ways to reach people until they had to. And it let me know, oh, that's not a doctrinal issue you own. What you are rejecting is not doctrine. You're rejecting strategy. You're rejecting methods, right? And so what I've learned is dudes that were so fixed on a rigid method learn how to change when them people stop coming to church and giving them tithes.
Absolutely. Like, we definitely have a pivot, and we have to continue to progress, because God uses each generation differently.
Yeah. And I've always told some of our seasoned elder pastors, man, progress don't mean contemporary. Progress means what Paul says, I become all things to all men that I might win some. Right? The way I engage our young people today ain't the same way you engage them when we was coming up. You know what I'm saying? You there's a different way of connecting. And so, progression is just saying I am willing to learn and become aware of what you need. And if it doesn't violate my convictions and my doctrine of faith, then I'm willing to meet you where you are so I can help you get to where you need to be. That's that's what the progressive church really is.
Absolutely.
But so many people are fearful because we have conflated progression with contemporary.
My Lord, my Lord, my Lord, my Lord. We may need you to drop your cash out.
You silly.
But that's true though. Like, we have to understand the importance of being progressive, whether it's your media in ministry, using social media, using graphics. How you have to read, because you have to read now, not forgetting the generation that can't do it, but you have to understand the generation that can outweighs the generation that can't. So you have to be willing to be multi-dimensional. It's like me and my pastor, as I say, my second dad, we talk about it often. It's two churches.
Mm-hmm.
You got the physical and you got the virtual.
Yep.
You got two churches. And sometimes your virtual will reach more than even the physical.
That's exactly right. That's one of the things that we also learned during COVID as well, that the virtual church was bigger than our physical church. And so it caused us to reshape and rethink, right? There are people who connect with us virtually every week from all over the country. Well, you can't neglect them if they plugging in and tuning into your ministry, because they are just as much a part of your church. And they might not be the hands and feet or boots on the ground, but they are connected to your ministry. Them the same people that call and be like, okay, when y'all, what's going on in the church? Them the same people that also send donations through Amazon, to support various ministry initiatives, or send their tithes and their offerings, even though they're not physically here, they're supporting the mission of the church. So you can't neglect them, right?
Yeah,
So God has forced us to look at things in a different way.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Well, is there anything else on your heart today, Pastor King, you want to share with us?
Man, I'm just glad to be a part of the conversation, man. I think having the opportunity to talk to people about ministry and about life, man, there's no greater joy than I have than to do that, right? Because, again, we are all in this thing together. And one of the things that I want to share with us is that we've got to learn how to go back and dig some old wells that may have been plugged up. There are some things that have allowed us to sustain and to thrive in the harshest of social, cultural, economic circumstances. We as a church are a resilient church, but we've got to go back and redig some of those wells that fueled our resiliency, that we don't lose, the next generation, because we don't have the power source. We're not plugged into the power source that sustained us through some really hard times. And secondly, I want to encourage us as the church. We've got to learn some lessons from our community, the culture of our community. We made it by sharing with one another. Brown, if you got eggs and I'm baking a cake or making my cornbread and I need some eggs, I ran out, I should be able to come next door and get some eggs. If you need some sugar or some butter or a stick of butter, because you're making a pound cake and I got some, you should be able to come over to my house and get what you need, right?
And we can eat together after
And we
we
can
get
eat together. One of the things that I think is the next cultural move of what we call the Black church experience is to get to the place where we begin to leverage in safety and trust resources for the vibrancy of ministry and discipleship without being scared that somebody trying to take our members.
Mm. And I'm glad you said that, because something else that I think a lot of churches have to look at is the fact that there's going to come a time where what you had, you don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to get sometimes and I get it, but sometimes we have to get to that place where some churches have to get to a place where it's like, maybe it's time for us to merge.
Yes, absolutely. Where we begin to love the people more than we love our egos.
More than, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Because
Here's the thing too, Brian. I'm so glad you said that, because I really do believe that is a place that it's a taboo subject between Black pastors, because many of us feel like we have a sense of failure if the church hasn't survived. But you're right. There comes a point in time we might need to think about mergers, and I say this for one reason. Many of what I call our wonderful churches, our white brothers and sisters, they have people who pour financially into the church. You can have a wonderful church, white church, with 50 people, but they got 4-5 staff for 50 people, and they can sustain that.
yep.
For many of us, we can barely pay our pastors a livable wage, but yet we expect everything from him. We expect him to preach, teach, cast vision, administrate the church, teach Bible study, and then fill in and teach other classes. We can't have discipleship class. We can't even afford a youth preacher, but we complain about the youth not being at the church. It comes a point in time when we have to say, are we really about the mission, or do we want to be separated? If we merge churches at times or shared resources, right, we could become a much more effective body of believers. Even if our membership exists at some other church, you know what I'm saying? If you got a banging youth ministry, well, let me send my youth over there.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Don't mean, you ain't got to move your membership, and we got to be honest about those messages. But it takes some sensitivity and stuff like that. But we need to begin to start thinking about things like that.
And the problem, and sadly, we're so territorial.
Yeah.
But with from going to Southern Baptist school,
Yeah.
one thing that I always was impressed was they would plant churches.
They plant churches.
They plant churches. With black folk, the only time we plant in church is when one group get mad at another group and we just start in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't plant. Well, we don't plant for the right reasons. And they plan and send people to school, help create schools. And I think that's something else as the black church we have to do is get to that place educationally. When we talk about education with scholarships, great, but also try to have those different type of theological institutes, things of that nature, to where the ministry will continue to flourish. Because in Dallas, Texas, there's a school called Southern Bible Institute. They
Mm-hmm.
just got their accreditation, which I'm happy about, from having used to live in Fort Worth, and I would see
Yeah.
the work they were doing. That's what I'm saying. They had that. One of my pastoral mentors, Uncle JB, as I call him, Pastor Johnny Bradley at Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church in Dallas, was president of a Dallas Bible Theological Institute. Now he's not the president more, but even still, they would have different pastors and just teach. But that's something else that we as the black church have to do. We have to be focused on, as I said, theological, but how can we share with one another so that we can all grow together?
Well, here's the thing, too, man. I think when you strip it all away, all of it is rooted in a lack of education holistically. The more we become aware of the real issues, we have a choice. Are we really about the mission, or are we just about having church? Right. And that's where I think the evolution of our theological minds have to grow, where we become more mission minded than church mind. And when I say church, I'm not talking about the church universal. I'm talking about my own little, this my church, this my people, this my tribe, right? We've got to begin to transcend that and be really more concerned about the health of the entire body of believers. But that comes when we educate ourselves. Secondly, too, I think the reason why we don't think in those terms or think along those lines is because, just similar to our lifestyles, man, I'm just trying to pay these bills and put food on the table, man. I ain't got time to think about that. So all of those social determinants of health and wellness of the black community also plague and create the social determinants, spiritual determinants of health in the church. See, when I don't have a healthy church because, they working so much overtime and falling asleep in church and whatever the case may be, don't have access to healthcare, don't have access, to certain resources, man, those are hindrances to the gospel too.
Yes, sir.
And so this is why, I'm really incumbent upon building relationships with pastors like yourself to say, man, let's get out of this competition thing, man. We ain't nobody competing. We trying to complement one another. Because if you look good, I look good because we part of the same family. And we have really allowed, even in our theological development and spiritual formation, we've allowed the enemy to place divisive wedges between us where we have lost our focus on mission and we're focusing on ourselves under the banner of the gospel.
Yes, sir. My goodness. My goodness. Also, tell them about your church. Tell them about First Baptist.
Man, well, man, we just, we are a church, man, that really just is striving to just serve and bless people. We are always about serving people in our community. We are very much community minded. We're always trying to develop. We're always trying to show and to share the love of Jesus, trying to really live the gospel practically and openly, and be the hands and feet of Jesus everywhere we go. That's one of our things, man. We want to be the visible representations of Christ everywhere we go.
Well, once again, I appreciate you for coming. Like I said, I appreciate your kindness, your love, your friendship towards me since I've been in this great city. I appreciate your support and your encouragement.
Yeah.
Definitely appreciate that. And Pastor King and First Baptist will be with us April the 6th as we close out our Holy Week revival. So I'm looking forward to him coming in First Baptist and we having a grand time and to hear him come and slay us with the word and preach us happy and preach us crazy.
No, man. I'll be shaking in my boots up there.
So,
I'm
but
behind the pastor, G. Christopher Brown.
anyways, he talking about somebody else. I don't know what he's talking about. But listen, we thank y'all for tuning in. I'm gonna ask Pastor King to stay for just a quick minute. We thank y'all for tuning in today. We pray you've been blessed. So continue to like, comment, and share. And we look forward to seeing you next time for another Clergy Conversation. So God bless you.